It's time now for the Kill the Can podcast.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Kill the Can podcast. Has been a minute, unfortunately. I have not been great about my promise to the listeners and to myself of getting out podcasts on a more regular basis, but we're going to continue to try and continue to find time in my schedule to get it done. I actually just dropped off one of my boys at school this morning, and so we're going to knock out a podcast here on my way to work. I hope everybody is doing well. I hope the spring is off to a wonderful start for you. I wanted to chat for a minute or acknowledge, in the last couple of weeks, I have heard more positive feedback about the podcast than I have in a significant amount of time. And I don't know necessarily kind of why that is. In looking at the numbers of downloads and those kind of things, I see that the podcast continues to grow. There continues to be more listeners both on podcast platforms as well as YouTube and Rumble, which I put the podcast onto as well. But I just wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted to acknowledge new listeners to the podcast and to thank you for reaching out, providing comments, asking questions, and giving, feedback about the pod. Overwhelmingly positive, but for those that have provided negative feedback as well, hey, I appreciate that as well. So just wanted to acknowledge that before we got started here. I wanted to pass along a conversation that I had recently with a good friend of mine who is a personal trainer, a younger guy, and he and I have had several conversations over the years about nicotine, about alcohol, about weight loss, about working out, and those kind of things, and just kind of general health. Like I said, this guy is a personal trainer. I consider him a good friend of mine, and he knows very full well kind of my experience and my history with nicotine. He himself is a nicotine user, and we were having a conversation while we were watching a recent UFC event. And we were having a conversation about for lack of a better term, picking your poison, right? And it was funny because he, again, knows very full well my history with nicotine and with Kill the Can. And he knows that I've been quit for a long time. And he had quit or had tried to quit for quite some time. And as we were having this conversation, I was sitting there and drinking a beer, and he was sitting there with multiple nicotine pouches in. And we were both sitting there kind of lamenting our choices. And it was really interesting to me where, with my perspective on quitting nicotine has always been, for me as a nicotine addict, the prevailing narrative these days around the drug nicotine itself. You'll hear a ton of commentary out there in the landscape about how nicotine itself is good for you. And I've talked on numerous occasions on this podcast and on the site about how I'm not even going to bother to try to overturn that narrative. What I will say is, for me as a nicotine addict, if there are benefits of nicotine, I cannot enjoy them. Because for me, one dip, one nicotine pouch, one whatever is never enough. And that will invariably lead me back to the life of a nicotine addict that I tried so very hard and worked so very hard to escape. And for the record, he fully recognizes that. And yet he was sitting there having this conversation with me while having 2 nicotine pouches. Now, the ironic thing, I thought, was he has recently quit drinking. And so And as I'm sitting there kind of defending a nicotine-free lifestyle, not defending, that's probably the wrong word, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying. As I was sitting there and kind of talking about a nicotine-free lifestyle and what it was like to be a nicotine addict, he was sitting there from this perspective of, well, I no longer drink, again, as I'm sitting there having a beer. And again, this is not, I'm not looking to turn this into an anti-alcohol or a straight edge podcast or anything, anything like that. But it was just really interesting to me to see this teeter-tottering, and again, in my mind, it was this concept of picking your poison. Every once in a while, I will hear online, well, you rage against nicotine, but, you drink alcohol or you drink caffeine or what have you, right? And those are completely fair and legitimate criticisms of kind of me and my position. Yes, I have chosen to tackle the nicotine demon in me. And I have thus far, for the last, 18 plus years, I have beaten that particular demon. To this point in my life, I have not chosen to tackle the caffeine demon or the alcohol demon in with the same vim and vigor that I've gone after nicotine. I've talked on numerous occasions on this podcast about weight and my struggles with weight. I do think that for me personally, there's a very large component of that has to deal with alcohol in terms of how much I drink and what I drink and those kind of things. And as I get older, I'm starting to come around to this position of, I could make a really good argument to myself that I should cut out alcohol, I should cut out caffeine, those kind of things. And again, it's this concept in my mind of picking your poisons, picking your battles at the time for you and making those decisions for you. Kill the Can has never been, at least I don't want it to be, an organization that is out there making everybody, or with a mission of making people quit. That's not the intent. The intent, in my opinion, is when people have made that decision that they want to quit nicotine, we will be there to help support that decision, to help hold accountable, to bring all of the tools to bear that we have shown beyond a shadow of a doubt, I think at this point, is the best method to quit and to stay quit. This concept of brotherhood, accountability, daily promises, everything that we preach on Kill the Can. But again, it has never been kind of going out and pushing our message to say, you have to quit, everybody has to quit, those kind of things. There are some anti-tobacco and anti-nicotine organizations out there that really, in my opinion, push that message a little bit too far. That's not what I personally have ever been about. I would rather be there for somebody when they have already made the decision versus going out and trying to push my lifestyle, my choices on somebody else. I'm a big believer in personal choice, personal freedom. So I've never been a fan of, banning these products. Like those kind of things. I do think that an adult should be able to make their decisions about what they do and what they ingest or what they don't ingest. And so that's kind of why I'm not out there with this concept of you need to quit. Now, on the kind of flip side to that, I also get into this argument often online with the the harm reduction folks, right? And the argument, and again, it's not an argument per se, but they will take the opinion, well, these products, whether they be vape products, it's typically the vape folks that I have this discussion with. These products are so much safer than smoking. Nicotine pouches are so much safer than smokeless. Snus is so much safer than chewing tobacco. And I won't even necessarily disagree with that statement. But they're not safe. There's a massive difference in this space between safer and safe. They are not safe to use. They still contain nicotine. They, again, might give you those quote-unquote benefits of nicotine. And again, I say quote-unquote because I'm not going to argue the science. And I'm not going to argue whether or not there are actually some benefits, again, for a non-nicotine user. There may be. But where, in my opinion, the harm reduction argument kind of falls apart is when they say something like, well, these products have helped me quit smoking, and without these products, I wouldn't be able to quit smoking or dipping or what have you. That's where the argument falls apart, because I refuse to believe in the narrative of I can't quit. I just fundamentally refuse to believe that. Now, if you want to tell me that, hey, I started using nicotine pouches and they got me off smokeless tobacco, I was never able to quit smokeless tobacco, and now I'm off and I'm using nicotine pouches, yes, congratulations, you have quit dipping. But again, I would argue you've changed your delivery method. So, are you being safer? Yes, I will say you're being safer. But please don't come out with me with the argument of I just can't quit and these products have allowed me to quit. Again, maybe it's just a kind of a fundamental difference. And I guess to kind of bring this whole thing full circle, if I'm going to not be a hypocrite in my own thinking, that's their choice, right? And that's the poison in this particular scenario that they have picked. They have picked to choose a different type of poison, the same way I have continued to pick a different type of poison, whether it be alcohol or caffeine or what have you. So again, it was an interesting conversation. And I'm probably reading way into it more than probably he was. In fact, there was another buddy of mine sitting there who had been quit for quite some time. And he had gone, and he was also sucking on nicotine pouches while we were sitting there having this conversation. And that, like, really, I was bummed and I was sad because I know how hard he had worked to quit dipping, and he had kind of gone back to nicotine pouches, and it continued to point out to me just how powerful those products are, just how pervasive they are in the landscape. There are so many nicotine pouch products these days. It really is amazing. And there are more coming. And I'm glad that we've got so many more nicotine pouch users finding Kill the Can, using the support systems that we have put in place. Because the reality is that our support system will help those people to quit the same way they have helped thousands of people quit smokeless, quit smoking, quit cigars, quit vaping, because at the end of the day, the methods that we use are targeting the same addictive properties of those products. So, thanks for listening this morning. Thank you for all of the positive feedback about the podcast. Again, I'm going to hope to try and get back to some sort of a regular posting schedule. If you've got questions, if you've got comments, please leave them on whatever platform you're listening to. Send me an email, send me a comment. I'm happy to answer those questions. Thank you, quitters. I'm honored to be quit with you. We'll talk to you soon.
Join us again next time for another edition of the Kill the Can podcast.